Okay, we'll wait another minute or two, a couple of minutes, in case someone else wants to join, and then we'll begin the class.
I want to be here. I'm gonna sit on your back.
Thanks.
Okay. Good early afternoon, everyone. This is Tani Krasnianski. Rabbi Shiner had his nephew's wedding was in New York, and that's where he is today. So I'll be giving the class. Nice to see. Thank you all for joining, and looking forward to spending some time together. This week's Torah portion is the Torah portion called Re'eh. Like I discussed before, we're in the book of Deuteronomy, and this is Moshe going over a lot of what was discussed in the previous 4 books of the Torah. You know, the fact that we're in Deuteronomy means that we're getting closer and closer to the end of the Torah. We're in the 5th book, which means when we finish the Torah, that's going to be Simchat Torah, which unfortunately is the day of tragedy last year. October 7th was on the holiday of Simchat Torah. It means we're getting closer and closer to that date. Just in case you didn't hear, there was a hostage rescued. A Israeli Bedouin hostage that was rescued today. So that's good news, and we hope to hear a lot more good news in the very soon future. I saw a thing about the army doesn't want to give away a lot of details about this mission. We're hoping it's because there's more to come, but let's wait and see. So in the Torah portion of Re'eh, it goes through a lot of the mitzvahs which were previously mentioned in other Torah portions. And I'm just going to one of them is the mitzvah of kosher. Which animals are kosher, which animals are not kosher. And I want to touch upon some of the interesting ideas and discussions about that and the lessons we can learn. So there's the Bavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Shearson. He was born in Yekaterinburg. He was born in Nikolaev, Ukraine. Then his father became the chief rabbi of the city of Yekaterinburg, which became known as the city of Dnepropetrovsk. That's where he lived. And it's something interesting that I learned recently is that he in that city, it was a very diverse city. It wasn't necessarily a very religious city. So the Rebbe grew up in this atmosphere of welcoming all Jews and being non-judgmental, etc. And obviously, I'm sure contributed to the way he went about his leadership. So his father was the rabbi of that city, and his yahrzeit was this past Shabbos. It's 80 years since he passed away. His father was arrested by the KGB for the communists for spreading Judaism, for trying to keep Judaism alive, while the communists were trying to stamp out all religion, but especially Judaism. And just give you one example, a story. Passover was coming, so the government didn't want any illegal private matzahs being sold, etc. So they wanted his name was Leivik. They wanted him to give the certification for the matzahs because they knew that he was the only respected hechsher in that area. And long story short, they were transferring the flour for the matzahs on a boat, and it rained on it or something, and the flour got wet. And we all know that's the problem with chametz and the closest. Someone asks you, what's the closest thing to chametz on Passover that you're going to eat? It's matzah. Matzah is the closest thing, because the only difference between chametz and matzah is if the matzah takes more than 18 minutes to be fully baked, then it becomes chametz. So from the moment when the water and the flour touch each other, that's when you start counting the 18 minutes. And if you've ever been in a matzah bakery, they literally have a timer, and it's it's very pressuresome. And I was running around trying to from when they start this I call it a shift from this set. From when in other words, it starts from when they pour the water into the flour, and they're rushing, and then after the 18 minutes, the timer goes off, and whatever's there is there, whatever's baked is baked, whatever's not baked is nothing you can throw out. To change the tablecloths, and then they have to change everything. That's in general matzah. So what happened was, again, this shipment of flour got wet, and therefore it could not be used for matzah because it's obviously way more than 18 minutes since the water touched it. And therefore he was not going to see that the matzah was kosher. So KGB style, they're like, you're gonna sign on this that it's kosher for Passover. And he long story back and forth, and he refused, and he didn't do it, and they threatened his life if he's not going to sign, and he still didn't want to sign, and they eventually let him go. But this is one example of him standing up to the KGB in regards to try to keep Judaism alive and not to give in anything. And there's many stories like that. He publicly and proudly continued all his Jewish activities, and eventually, though, he did get arrested, and he did get sentenced to exile in a country called Kazakhstan, in a city where I don't know how it's spelled, but it's pronounced like Chile or something like that, in Kazakhstan. And he was sentenced to exile for 5 years, and he went through tremendous hardship. No food and other things, that where he was just like an unhealthy place to be. The air and whatever, a very small house. And he got sick at the end of his exile. He got sick and eventually passed away in the city Almaty, Kazakhstan, which is the main, or maybe pronounced today Almaty. And that's where he passed away. That's where he's buried. And it's actually a thing. A lot of Lubavitchers will fly every year to Kazakhstan to spend a Shabbat by his gravesite. And so this year was 80 years, and a lot of people went. A lot of people. There are a few chartered flights that went to Kazakhstan. Now I'm saying this because I was just getting into the idea that the Rabbi was born in Ukraine, and eventually he got married to the previous Lubavitch Rebbe's daughter, Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson's daughter, and they moved to Germany. They moved to Berlin, where um, he was studying university, and I don't remember exactly what he was studying, but he was in university in Berlin. And then when things were getting crazy with the rise of the Nazi Party, etc., then he left Berlin and he went to Paris. He went to France. He was in the University of Sorbonne, and that's where he was. But then the Nazis came during World War II, and he ran away to the south of France, I think. But he was in Nazi-occupied France, and eventually he only was able to escape in 1941. He got on one of the last, boats going from. He ended up going through Portugal. I think that's where he left Europe, from Portugal, and that's where he made it to the United States, to New York, in 1941. Now, just something interesting is that he didn't. His official reason that he was taken in, the way he applied for a visa or whatever it was not as a rabbi, but was as an engineer, because of the degree that he had from the university. He came to the United States as an engineer, and that's why in the first few years that he was here, he worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard on ships, and it's been some sort of secret of what he did there. I don't think till today we really know what the projects that he worked on for some reason, and that's what he had to do because he came here as an engineer. Now he made it here in 1941 in Sivan time, which is around, let's say, late June, early July. That's when he made it to the United States. Now, Rabbi, just something interesting about his office. I don't know if anyone's ever been to his office. If you're going on the New York trip, that Rabbi Schneier, the men's New York trip, Rabbi Schneier is arranging, or maybe you've been on a women's trip, they go to the Rebbe's room, the Rebbe's office. Now, his Rebbe's office, I don't know if you've ever seen videos or pictures, it not always was the most neat office, because the Rebbe had a lot of books, a lot of Sfarim, a lot of Hebrew, Jewish Torah books stacked up that he was learning, that he was in the middle of using. But something very eerie and interesting, that 1992, that's the year that the Rebbe had his stroke at his father-in-law's resting place. He had the stroke in Adar, close to before Pesach. So this was probably in the late winter. So that whole first half of the year, starting from let's say October, whenever it was, the Rebbe started clearing out his office and sending out papers and this and that to be burned and whatever. It's very interesting, very very eerie, very not understood. And what happened was, when he had a stroke, they looked in the Rebbe's room and they saw that it was empty, clean. There was nothing left. I'm saying there were books on the shelves, but there was nothing put out. Everything was cleared out. That's a separate discussion on its own. But there were some things left in the desk, and these were the Rebbe had some personal notes, writings that he wrote, not necessarily that he had intention that they should be published. He just wrote them down, little different Torah thoughts and things like that, or experiences that he wanted to write down. And those are, in Hebrew, we call them reshimos, little things that were written down. And so only after he passed away did they go into the office and really see these things, and they started publishing them after he passed away in 1995, 96, 97. They started publishing these things. These are called reshimos. These are the last things that we really have that came out from the Rebbe. It only came out after he passed away. Now we're gonna talk about one specific reshima that he wrote down. He wrote this down. Let me check the date exactly. On September 11th, 1941. That's when he wrote down this Torah thought. This happens to be the same day that they started the construction of the Pentagon in 1941, which we'll circle this back to September 11th, 2001, where they attacked the Pentagon. So we'll connect these two things. But the Rebbe wrote down a Torah thought about this week's Torah portion about what makes fish kosher. So what does the Torah say? Well, you're allowed to have things that are in the water. I'll read you the quote from the verse. It says, "This may you eat of all that is in the waters, everything that has fins and scales. Those are the two signs that make a fish kosher. Fins and scales you may eat, but anything that has no fins and scales you may not eat." Okay, so these are the two things you need: fish and fins and scales. So the Talmud touches upon this verse, and it says, by the way, you should know that all fish that have scales also have fins, and therefore are kosher. So again, all fish that have scales also have fins, but there are fish that have fins, but they don't have any scales, and those fish would not be kosher. Okay, so that's just a good rule to know, that if you see scales, you know that the fish has fins also, and it's kosher. All you need to really see is the scales. So the Gemara asks, the Talmud asks, I'm sure you were thinking, so if so, the Torah could have just written scales without also having to write fins. Yeah, why do you need to mention the whole idea of scales? Fins. If the only thing you really need to look out for is scales, and if you see scales, you know it has fins. That's what the Talmud asks. So the Talmud answers that it was taught in the study house of Rabbi Yishmael. This is so the Torah should be increased and made great. In other words, yes, you're right, it's unnecessary to bring in this idea of fins, but the Torah wanted to add, to be increased and made great, so therefore it wrote also this idea of fins. But if you think about it, this answer is very strange. It's totally irrelevant if it has fins, basically. That's what we're saying. So how does it make the Torah greater by adding something that's not relevant? It's not important. Why we need this whole idea of fins in regard to the fish being kosher if it doesn't actually tell you anything? Fins itself don't tell you anything. You need to see scales. But if you see scales, then you know it's kosher because you know for sure it has fins. So why does it need to mention the idea of fins? In other words, what we're asking is, what is significant? What is unique? What is the quality or the symbolism of the fins and scales, or specifically the fins that the Torah is trying to highlight, and therefore it's mentioning this idea of fins, even though it doesn't have any necessarily practical use, because again, if you see scales, you know it has fins. All you need to really see is the scales. And by the way, this is relevant because I know a lot of people, when it comes to meat, it needs to be you need to have a kosher symbol, etc. That for sure you need, because and even if you have a cow and you see it's kosher, it needs to be slaughtered in the proper way and salted and etc. You can't take for granted that, or you could know for sure that if it's not kosher certified, that the meat is not kosher. But that's in regards to meat. When it comes to fish, on the other hand, fish does not need to be slaughtered. It's a lot more simple, the process, and therefore, people are a lot more comfortable buying fish from not necessarily a kosher store, or doesn't have a kosher symbol, etc. But as long as, and what's the reason? Because as long as you know that this is a kosher fish, and how are you going to know? You're going to see if you see the scales. And I've heard, thank God, I hate shopping, so I don't have a lot of experience in this, but I know there are people that will, let's say they have fish, salmon sitting in the grocery store in Publix, but they already took off the skin. So just to make sure that you know which fish this came from, etc., they might ask the back to bring them a new fish that has the skin on it, so they see the scales, or all the different little technicalities to make sure that it's a fish that has scales. And maybe if you see a scale still attached or whatever, that's already enough. I don't want to get into the specifics. I'm not well versed in this, but I just know that it is practical. This idea of the fins and scales, and people really stick to it, especially if you think about if you're traveling in an area that doesn't really have kosher food. In Europe or whatever, fish is an easy go-to. You just want to make sure that it's a fish that has fins and scales. And yeah, so then, but we want to talk about the symbolism that the fish, the fins and scales, the Torah is really teaching us. And this is really a broader idea that when it comes to all kosher food, the idea of it, or at least one of the ideas of it behind it, not necessarily that it's healthier. Some people like to think that kosher food is more healthy, and maybe there's an element of truth to that, meaning the fact that it's been supervised. You know more about what's happening to the process, and therefore maybe you're a little more guaranteed that nothing fishy, no pun intended, like nothing was done with the food that you wouldn't want, or that it hasn't been switched. Unfortunately, I remember like some scandal came out where they were serving horse meat instead of beef. Just all these stories come out when it's kosher. You know more of what you're getting. But putting that aside, kosher food is not really more healthy. I could think of a lot of kosher foods that are very unhealthy. So it's not necessarily about that. But one of the ideas that's given is more about the character that these animals have. And that when you heard the expression of you are what you eat. And there's this idea that you adapt some of the character of an animal when you eat it, and therefore the Torah is telling us to eat these animals with this character and not with others. So we want to understand what is represented with this idea of fins and scales. We'll start off with scales, and then we'll move on to fins. Scales. What are scales on a fish? Scales protect the fish. It's almost like it's armor, which is idea of integrity. Being strong and sticking to your inner core, your inner values, etc. Not necessarily being affected from the world around you. And that's or the circumstances around you. So whether it comes to business, not deceiving customers, even though there'll be financial profits, etc. You don't lie to other people for some short-term gain, but rather you have this integrity, you have this protective armor around yourself. And this is idea of having morals, knowing what's right and what's wrong, having absolute standards of what's right and wrong, and therefore, even though your mood might change or whatever, but this is the wrong thing, or this is the right thing, and that's the idea of scales. Fins, on the other hand, in a certain sense, maybe I don't want to say it's the opposite, but it could go contrary to this. Fins is what a fish uses to propel itself forward. It's like wings on a bird. Fish has fins, which pushes the fish forward, which represents the idea of ambition. Someone having a healthy level of ambition will want to go, or is ready to go into the turbulent sea of life, and to maximize their potential. So that's the idea of fins. Fins is the idea of wanting to swim in the world, really make an imprint, make a lasting impact on the world. That's the idea of fins. So again, scales is more the idea of armor and integrity, and fins is more the idea of propelling yourself forward and ambition. Now, what is the priority? What is more important? What would you say? The fins or the scales? Integrity or ambition? So, or in other words, like when it comes to education, what do you want to, instill more in your children or your grandchildren? Integrity or ambition? So what is the Talmud? Let's look at the Talmud. What does the Talmud teach us when it talks about a fish? We said it says that all kosher fish have scales, or have fins and scales. And if it has scales, then it for sure has fins. In other words, what the Talmud is telling us, you want to focus on more. What you want to make sure of, and what's absolutely necessary is having scales. That's what you want to. That's what you want to focus on. Making sure that they have a clear knowledge of what's right and wrong. They have a proper sense of morality and integrity. That's the most important thing. Yeah, we've seen people that maybe have fins, they have a lot of ambition, but they push everyone aside, or they don't, they run everyone over, so to speak. And that's not what you want. You want integrity. You want the scales. And what the Talmud is telling you, that if someone has unyielding commitment to morality and decency, then this child will definitely develop fins as well. They will, they'll be able to use their integrity and their consistency, etc., to make the world a better place. They'll develop the fins. You don't have to worry. That's what the Talmud says. So the Talmud asks, if so, again, that's the Talmud saying, if every fish that has scales has fins. So the Talmud asks, if so, why do you need to mention the fins? Just mention the scales, and the fins will develop on its own. Why do you need to mention fins? So Talmud says, no, don't. What was the answer to the Talmud? The Talmud said, so the Torah can be increased and made great. Yeah, the Hebrew word says lahagdil Torah v'yadir, to make the Torah great and increased. What's it saying? That it's important to not only have integrity and morality, which obviously us Jews we focus on, but Hashem wants us not only to be good, but He wants us to be successful and shine and utilize our talents and resources to transform the world around us, to make the world a place where Hashem is comfortable. And that's what I mean, to make the Torah great and large. In other words, to beautify, to spread the impact, the teachings, the lessons that the Torah has for us, that should penetrate the entire world and turn it into an oasis of godliness, of goodness, and holiness. So in other words, again, it mentions scales, and that's the most important thing. But don't think that, okay, fins will come, they won't come, whatever. Like, it's not. No, the Torah, we need fins also. We want fins also, because why? To make the Torah great. In other words, to increase the impact and the beauty of the Torah, the light that the Torah is shining on in the world. That's why we have. That's why the Torah mentions these two ideas, fins and scales. And that's how you can understand the Gemara, the Talmud's back and forth. Yeah, scales, integrity, fins will come, but we need to highlight the fins and ambition, because we need to utilize our ambition, our talents, etc., to spread and make the Torah great, to bring out Hashem in the world, Hashem and the Torah's teachings to the world. Now, let's go to September 11th for a second. What exactly happened there? So, and again, September 11th, in 1941, there was right before the Germans were going to end up in Kiev and do the worst story of the Holocaust, the Babi Yar, where they killed, I think, well over 30,000 Jews in 2 days. So let's talk about the Germans for a second. The Germans, they personified, the culture, etc. They were like fins, but no scales. They had a lot of ambition. They had a love of life. Yeah, but because they all this ambition, their integrity, their morality was horrifically skewed. Yeah, they loved their dogs. They appreciated poetry, philosophy, scientific advancement. But what happened? They also sent millions of Jews to die in the gas chambers. They had fins, but no scales. That's one extreme. Then you go to September 11th, 2001, where that was the opposite. That was people where they almost hate all progress and advancement. People that are Muslim extremists. To them, whatever they did on September 11th, killing innocent people, was worth it to protect the integrity of of Allah and whatever else that they believe in. And that's just to it's important, I think, for nowadays what's going on around Israel, etc. It's like the world thinks that these people are regular people. They're just upset that they don't have freedom of movement as much or things like that. But if we have to understand them better, that they're people that they have very tough, very thick scales on what they're trying to hold on to, but they hate all progress and they hate the West and they hate what the West thinks and the way what the West represents. And to just think that if we just do this or just do that, it's going to fix the whole story is not true at all. That's the one extreme, and therefore, kind of this Torah portion is telling us not to be in the extreme of either one. Not to be the extreme of the Germans, which was the Nazis, which was just fins, not to have just scales, lose the whole idea that you're here to make the world a better place, etc., and have fins. So in Torah, we teach that we have both. You need to have an idea of scales, teach integrity, morality, etc. Know with absolute assurance what there's right and there's wrong. Things shouldn't bend. On the other hand, you also have fins to make sure you're sharing the message of truth of Torah with the world, making sure that the world is becoming a better place, not hating change. On the contrary, trying to make a change for the better. That this is obviously a paraphrase, but this is what the message that the Rebbe wrote on September 11th, 1941, when he, not long after he made it to the United States. So I do want to mention that the Rebbe was very thankful to the United States, and he'd always call the United States a Medina Shel Chesed, a country of kindness. That was the term he used. It's a Medina Shel Chesed, and the Rebbe had a lot of faith in the United States and a lot of hope in it, and the Rebbe was very proud of the way the United States was started, and he would quote the founding fathers, etc., for different things. One of the big things the Rebbe had was he pushed for this idea of a moment of silence in public schools or in all schools. So I don't know if some of you grew up that they had prayer in school. Maybe it was a Christian prayer, but they had prayer. So maybe people weren't so comfortable with that, having specific religion, so they cut it out. But the Rebbe said it's not a good thing, and the Rebbe said this actually leads, and it led to more crime, etc. Kids growing up with less of an awareness of that there's, a God above watching over what they're doing, and just because you can get away with something, doesn't mean you should do it. There's a God watching. The Rebbe said that he said this in response to the rising crime rates in the 70s, and his idea was to make this moment of silence in schools. Maybe not to have official prayer in the school. Let there be a minute in the beginning of the day where it's, no one talks. Every child does their thing, whatever their parents teach them. So Jewish kids, their parents will tell them what to say or what to think at that time. Christians, etc., atheists, maybe you don't have to think about a God, but think about whatever. To have this intentional minute in the beginning of school every day. I said it would lead to very, very positive changes in children. And I know recently, I think the state of Florida actually passed this. If anyone knows, you can indicate that in the chat or whatever. But I think the state of Florida instituted this idea. I'm not sure how it was implemented. I think other states are working on it. Obviously, it's many years after there was pushing for it, but this was something that he spoke about. And he said, look, people were against the idea of prayer in schools because you can't mix religion and church and state, religion and state. And the Rebbe said this is so against what the United States was founded on. He said, yes, the founding fathers had this idea of the separation of church and state, but the Rebbe would highlight how they were religious people, and they obviously didn't have the intention to take God out totally. It was just not to impose a specific God. I'm referring to the Lubavitch Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson, the Rebbe of Chabad. Yeah, and then this is something that he focused on, that they didn't want to actually make no church. I mean, there was no religion. No, they were men of faith, and they just wanted religious freedom to be able to practice whatever religion you is your religion, but not to take religion out. That wasn't their idea at all. And he would highlight this, and he would push for at least this moment of silence. But that's just one example that sticks out of my mind. But I've heard many times different videos. He refers to the United States as a Medina Shel Chesed, and he was very thankful for the fact that he's alive. He was alive and he got to do whatever he accomplished over his 40 years of leadership, all thanks to America taking him in the middle of World War II, middle of the Holocaust. The Rebbe lost a brother that was left in Ukraine, and a sister-in-law and a brother-in-law. The Rebbe's wife's sister and brother-in-law were killed during the Holocaust. The Rebbe's father-in-law himself was stuck in the Warsaw Ghetto after the Nazis already occupied Poland, and he had a whole miracle how he got out. The Wehrmacht, which was like not the SS, the other part of the. They were, I think, more like the intelligence part of the Nazi army. They were contacted and somehow were willing to take him out and transfer him to Latvia, and eventually he got out and he made it to America in 1940. But yeah, so again, we got into this because the Rebbe wrote this note down in the September 11, 1941, when he not long after he made it to the shores of the United States. The next thing I want to touch upon, which is along the same lines, is about when it comes to animals. Yeah, till now we're talking about fish. What makes animals kosher? So I'm sure you've heard this before, maybe in Hebrew school or somewhere. The two signs that make an animal kosher are if the animal has split hooves, by their feet, the hooves are split, fully split. And they chew their cut. In other words, that the animal will put something in their mouth, chew on it, swallow it, and then it will come back up and they'll chew it over again. Yeah, so what comes back up is called cud. So they chew the cud, they chew that animal, the cud over again, and then they swallow it again. That's what makes an animal kosher. Those are the two signs I mentioned in this week's Torah portion. Yeah, so that's a cow, a goat, sheep, gazelle, deer, a giraffe. They have these things. On the other hand, a donkey, a horse, they lack both of these things. These are not kosher. A pig has split hooves, but it doesn't chew its cud. That's why it's not kosher. A camel, for example, chews its cud, but it doesn't have fully split hooves, and therefore they're not kosher. Yeah, when it comes to a pig, almost like a symbolism of why Judaism doesn't like chazer, doesn't like pig, is because a pig basically it has the external features of it being a kosher animal, and it tries to deceive you like that. It says, "Oh, look, my hooves are split." It's the way that, at least as a kid, they illustrated to us. I think it's brought in Rashi. Like, "Oh, look, we're kosher. We have split hooves," but really it doesn't chew its cud. Really, the internal is not good, so it's deceiving, and that's why we don't like pig. But a camel is the other example of somebody that doesn't have fully split hooves, but does chew its cud. Now, again, we say that these characteristics are symbolic and they represent something, and that's why we're not supposed to eat things that lack these things. What are the spiritual qualities? What's the idea of having split hooves and chewing cud? So the first one is going to be similar to what we spoke about before. Split hooves. What does a split hoof mean? That you have the right side and the left side of the foot, and there's a clear divide between them. It needs to be fully split. A camel has maybe some separation, but it doesn't go all the way through. So there's the right and there's left. In other words, there's good and there's evil. There's good and bad, and there's a clear distinction between them. That is very important to know what is goodness and what is evil. And have a full definition. It can't be something that's up in the air, blurry. It's relative. It depends on the context, etc. And the difference between good and evil need to be very clear. That's, by the way, one of the big, again, talking about what's going on today. Like somehow it's becoming so blurry. Who's good and who's bad. and people are vouching for the side that represents evil. It's because things have become so blurred today. But the Torah is saying it's very important to make sure that people are raised with a clear sense of a full split between what's good and what's bad, what's evil. So that's the idea of having split hooves. Think about you can't have everything just loose and free and up in the air. For example, a violin. For violin to play beautiful music, you can't just have the strings flowing and being free. You need to tighten them down. There needs to be some sort of discipline in order for someone to have a moral discipline, in order for someone to have a wholesome life. Things can't just be everything up in the air. Or else then you lose your sense of reality even. What ends up happening is nothing is a given. If nothing's a given, then nothing's important. Nothing is sacred. Nothing's even real. And you can understand how it could lead to a mental health crisis or other things when everything's just up in the air. The I gets lost. Who am I? What's even really around me? Nothing's even clear. A lot of young people today grew up in America thinking like, oh, am I even in a good country? Is our country even good? Or things like that. Maybe we're the bad ones in the world and the other countries, they're the ones that are right. This is what happens when, things become blurred and there's not a clear distinction between what's good and what's evil. Rabbi Steinsaltz, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, which I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He was a great scholar in Israel. He shares a story. He grew up in this more secular environment. He was in a class, in a philosophy class, and the professor asked one of his students to start making a presentation. And the student said, "I speculate that." He started getting. Right away, the teacher stopped him and said, "Define I. Who's I?" And the teacher kept on refuting all his definitions of I. It's important to be able to define if you need real definitions, and that's the only way students are going to be able to really move forward and have a proper understanding of the world, or else they're in for a harsh reality check. So again, that's the first characteristic, the idea of having split hooves, having a clear distinction between what's right and wrong. And that's the only way we can really go about life in a clear-headed way, and we'll have a proper sense of self, etc. Then you have the idea of chewing cud. That even though you might think we have it all figured out and all our values, etc., but we have to also, on the other hand, not be too self-assured and too smug, about these about certain things. We have to regurgitate every once in a while our cud, to reflect on certain things. Can't question everything, but to if you think you have everything figured out and you're good for the rest of life, then obviously that leads to arrogance and being judgmental and other things. So you always have to be able to chew the cud. In other words, you chewed something once, you swallowed it, you got it, you have it figured out, but then sometimes just bring it back up, chew it over again, or almost like reconfirm maybe why this is the right thing, and then swallow it back again. You need to be able to, maybe be wrong, be open to being wrong. This is a different line from Rabbi Steinsaltz. He said, "How do you know if you're alive or dead? If something hurts you, it means you're alive. In other words, in order to be alive and know that you're producing, essentially you're being an addition, you're adding to the world is when sometimes you have to go out of your comfort zone or be open for things that might hurt you, etc. That's where real growth is able to happen. Okay, so with that we'll finish. Again, we spoke about the laws of kosher when it comes to fish and when it comes to animals. With fish, it's fins and scales. The Talmud said that scales represent, every fish that has fins has scales. So the Talmud asks, why do you even need fins? Why does the Torah even mention fins? The Talmud says to make Torah great and beautiful. So we understood that to mean, the Rabbi wrote that on September 11, 1941, he wrote this idea that scales, the idea of being protective of integrity, etc., having proper morals, and that's the most important thing. And that will lead to the development of fins. But the Torah does highlight fins also, like the Talmud. Why? To make the Torah beautiful. In other words, so we should know we need to have that ambition. We need to propel forward. We need to make sure we're contributing goodness and Torah values to the world around us too. That is the one side of it. On the other hand, not to only focus on either extreme of the fins or the scales. You need to have both, like we said, the Germans are only fins, Islamic extremists, terrorists are only scales, and we need to have in mind both. And along similar lines, you spoke about the two signs of a kosher animal, having split hooves and chewing its cud, making sure you have a clear, it has to be entirely split, between right and left, between good and bad, and have proper, to have absolute values. But on the other hand, certain ideas need to, we chew them, swallow them, but also to chew the cud to bring it back up sometimes, and to chew it over again, to be open to being wrong, to be open to some pain or whatever. And that's the way we grow and are successful, make an impact, and are humble in this world. So if there's any questions, I'll open it for questions. With that, we'll finish for today. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day. I'm looking forward to seeing you in shul or any other time in the near future. Great day.